The challenge is declared. The grand cosmic arena stood at the center of the universe, a massive coliseum built on a floating asteroid. It was ancient, older than most known civilizations, and had witnessed countless battles between the strongest warriors of the galaxy. Tonight, the air was thick with anticipation. Billions of beings from different planets watched, either in the stands or through holographic transmissions across the universe. At the center of the arena, standing tall, was Exalvoran, the undefeated champion. He was a towering reptilian-like alien with dark blue scales, glowing red eyes, and a body built for war. His armor was made from the bones of his fallen enemies, and in his hand he held the Bluedaxe of Tyrzok, a weapon so powerful that it had split moons in half. Exalvoran raised his arms, and the crowd roared. His voice, deep and thunderous, echoed through the arena. "Who among you dares to challenge me?" he declared. "Who thinks they are strong enough to face the champion of the universe?" Silence followed. Even among the bravest alien warriors, there was hesitation. They had seen what Exalvoran could do. They had watched him crush opponents 3 times his size. His battle record was perfect minus 100 victories, 0 defeats. No one had ever made him bleed. No one had ever come close to victory. Exalvoran laughed. "Cowards." He scanned the crowd, his sharp teeth visible in a menacing grin. "Is there not one among you who wishes to test their strength? Has the universe grown weak?" Then a voice cut through the silence. "I'll fight you." The entire arena turned towards the source of the voice. Standing at the entrance of the battlefield, stepping forward with slow, steady steps, was a human. The crowd erupted in murmurs. "A human? Is this a joke? They are weak creatures. They don't belong here." Exalvoran narrowed his eyes, studying the figure before him. A human male. Average height, lean but muscular. His short brown hair was unkempt, his face marked with an old scar over his left eyebrow. He wore no armor, only a simple combat suit. But his eyes, those sharp, piercing eyes, held no fear. The announcer's voice rang across the arena. "Challenger, state your name." The human stepped closer. He didn't bow, didn't hesitate. His voice was calm and firm. "Captain Adrian Drake." The name meant nothing to the aliens in the crowd, but somewhere, in distant corners of the universe, a few who knew of human history recognized it. A former soldier. A warrior who had survived impossible battles. A man who had walked away from war, only to return now, standing against a legend. Exalvoran chuckled, his deep voice vibrating through the air. "A human. Do you not know what you are facing? Do you not understand that I have crushed warriors stronger than you, faster than you? Entire planets tremble at my name." Adrian didn't blink. "I know exactly what I'm facing," he said. The alien champion leaned forward. "Then why step forward? What makes you think you can win?" Adrian tilted his head slightly. A smirk played on his lips. "You'll find out soon enough." The crowd gasped at his boldness. No one had ever spoken to Exalvoran like that. The announcer hesitated for a moment before continuing. "The rules of the grand arena remain the same. A fight to submission or death. No external weapons, only skill and strength shall determine the victor." Then came another voice, one that made the entire arena go silent. "This battle has consequences." High above, in a floating royal box, sat the Galactic Federation Council, the rulers of intergalactic affairs. The head counselor, an ancient being with golden skin and 6 glowing eyes, spoke with authority. "If the human loses," he announced, "then Earth shall be conquered by the Supreme Galactic Empire. They shall bow, they shall serve, and they shall know their place in the order of the cosmos." Gasps filled the stadium. The fate of an entire planet, on the shoulders of one man. Adrian remained still. His face showed no reaction, as if he already knew. "And if he wins?" someone in the crowd dared to ask. The counselor hesitated. Then humanity shall be recognized as an equal race among the stars, and Earth shall stand as a power in the galactic order. The stakes had been set. This was no ordinary fight. It was not just for glory. It was not just for pride. This was for the survival of an entire species. Zalvorin grinned. Now this is interesting. He tightened his grip on his axe. I hope you don't break too quickly, human. Adrian cracked his knuckles. I was about to say the same thing. The battle drums began to sound. The arena's lights dimmed, and spotlights focused on the two warriors standing face to face. The tension was electric. The entire universe held its breath. And then, the fight began. The weight of the universe. The universe washed. Across countless star systems, on planets teeming with life, in the deepest reaches of space where warlords and emperors sat on their thrones, everyone held their breath. The challenge had been accepted. The battle was set. And at the center of it all stood a single human, a warrior with the weight of a world. Adrian Drake stood in the heart of the grand cosmic arena, his boots pressing against the smooth ancient stone of the battlefield. Above him, holographic screens displayed his face, his name, and his species, human, earthborn. The reaction was instant. Laughter, shock, disbelief. The universe had seen humans before. They were explorers, traders, diplomats, sometimes even mercenaries. But warriors? Champions? That was unheard of. In the skyboxes, where the elites of the galaxies sat in floating thrones, the rulers of different star systems whispered among themselves. A human dares to challenge Exalvorin. This is a mistake. They are weak. Perhaps it is a strategy. But what could they possibly hope to accomplish? Adrian could hear the murmurs, but he didn't care. He didn't even glance at the glowing screens or the massive audience surrounding him. His focus was locked on the monstrous figure across from him. Zalvorin, the galactic champion. The alien warlord was still grinning, his sharp teeth gleaming under the arena lights. He had seen thousands of opponents step forward before. Some had been bigger. Some had been stronger. None had been as small as this one. Tell me, human. Zalvorin rumbled, rolling his shoulders, making his heavy armor clank with emotion. What does it feel like, carrying the weight of an entire world? Adrian didn't respond immediately. He flexed his fingers, his gaze never leaving the alien. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, measured. You wouldn't understand. Zalvorin chuckled. Oh, but I do. He stepped forward, the ground shaking beneath his massive frame. His shadow loomed over Adrian. Every warrior who has faced me has carried the burden of their people. And do you know what happened to them? Adrian remained still. They broke, Zalvorin said with a wicked smile. They shattered under the pressure. Some begged for mercy. Others fought until their last breath. But in the end, it didn't matter. Their planets belonged to the Galactic Empire now. Adrian tilted his head slightly. His face gave nothing away. But deep inside, he was studying, calculating, watching. The alien champion wasn't just trying to intimidate him. He was testing him, looking for fear, doubt, weakness. He wouldn't find any. The announcer's voice echoed across the arena once more. The stakes have been declared. The rules remain unchanged. This is a battle of skill, strength, and endurance. Only one shall stand victorious. Only one shall decide the fate of their world. Then, from high above, the voice of the Galactic Federation Counselor rang out once more. The Council has decided. If the human loses, Earth shall fall under permanent rule of the Galactic Empire. Its people shall serve. Its armies shall be disbanded. Its resources shall be stripped. The words carried finality. This was not a mere tournament battle. This was a war condensed into a single fight. Adrian inhaled slowly. He had always known the stakes. That's why he had come. That's why he had accepted this challenge. But it wasn't for glory. It wasn't even for Earth's survival. It was for something more. In the distant corners of the universe, in the war-torn colonies where humans had fought for their place among the stars, there had always been whispers of an inevitable war, a war that Earth could never win. The empires of the galaxies saw humans as insects, unworthy of power, undeserving of respect. Adrian was here to prove them wrong. Zalvorin cracked his knuckles, his massive muscles flexing. "You're quiet, human. I expected more words." Adrian finally smiled. "Talking isn't what wins battles." The alien's grin widened. "Good. I was hoping for a fighter, not a diplomat. A past that won't be forgotten." Somewhere in the stands, hidden among the sea of alien spectators, a hooded figure sat watching Adrian carefully. She was human, one of the few in the crowd, and her fingers trembled as she clutched a small metallic pendant around her neck. She knew who he was. She knew what he had done. Captain Adrian Drake, the last survivor of the Gen 4 incident, the ghost of the Orion Wars, the man who walked away from battle and had finally returned. Whispers began to spread through the galaxy's underground networks. The black market warlords, the rebel factions, the silent resistance movements that lived in the shadows, they all began to watch. If a human could defeat the champion of the universe, what else was possible? The first move. The crowd had fallen into a hush, waiting for the moment the fight would begin. Zalvorin rolled his shoulders, eager for combat. Adrian exhaled, calming his heartbeat. A horn sounded. The time had come. Begin. Zalvorin moved first. A blur of motion, faster than anything that large had a right to be. His axe swung through the air like a comet, a single strike powerful enough to turn steel into dust. And yet, Adrian was already gone. He sidestepped at the last possible second, just inches from death. The massive weapon smashed into the ground where he had stood, sending a shockwave through the arena. The crowd gasped. Zalvorin blinked, surprised. Adrian smirked. Too slow. Zalvorin's grin returned. His blood was boiling now. For the first time in years, he had found a worthy fight. The real battle had begun. The first clash. A moment of stillness before the storm. The battlefield trembled beneath the weight of the two warriors. Adrian Drake stood firm, his breath steady, his body loose yet prepared. Before him, Zalvorin loomed, his bluedax embedded deep into the stone floor of the arena, sending cracks rippling outward. The impact had been enough to shatter a tank, yet the human had avoided it effortlessly. For a brief moment, there was silence. The crowd, billions across the universe, collectively held its breath. Never had they seen a human dodge with such precision, survive the first attack of Zalvorin. Then, the cheers erupted. Some jeered, laughing at the champion's failed first strike. Others murmured in disbelief. Had the human actually dodged that? Zalvorin narrowed his glowing red eyes. His massive hands gripped the handle of his axe as he wrenched it free, swinging it to his side with effortless strength. He studied the human, his smirk returning. "You're fast," he admitted, his deep voice vibrating the very air. Adrian rotated his shoulder, rolling his neck. "You're predictable," he replied smoothly. The champion's smirk widened into a grin. "Good." He charged. Zalvorin's movements were a contradiction. His size made it seem impossible that he could move so quickly, but Adrian had expected this. Speed wasn't the alien's weakness. Arrogance was. The warlord swung his axe again, this time with more force, more precision. The very air screamed as the weapon sliced through it, heading straight for Adrian's skull. The human ducked low, rolling just beneath the blade, feeling the wind from the strike graze his hair. The moment he was back on his feet, Zalvorin was already coming in with a follow-up, a brutal knee strike aimed at Adrian's ribs. This time, Adrian had no time to dodge. The knee connected, sending a shockwave through his body. Adrian was launched backward, his body twisting in the air before crashing onto the stone. A split second of disorientation, He gritted his teeth, forced himself to breathe through the pain. His vision flickered. His ribs burned. Zalvorin exhaled, cracking his neck, still standing. Adrian coughed, pushing himself up onto one knee. His lip was split, blood dripping down his chin. He wiped it away and grinned. "You hit like a training bot," he mocked. The crowd roared at the audacity. Zalvorin's eyes flared, a predator finally enjoying the hunt. Then Adrian moved. Adrian's counterattack. This time, he charged first. To many watching, it was suicide. A human running straight at an alien warlord 3 times his size. Madness. Zalvorin welcomed it. He raised his axe, ready to cleave Adrian in two. But the human was already 3 steps ahead. At the last second, he feinted left. Zalvorin's axe came crashing down into empty air. Before the champion could recover, Adrian struck. A lightning-fast punch, aimed directly at the alien's knee joint. A precise, brutal impact. Zalvorin growled, his leg buckling slightly. He swung his arm in retaliation, attempting to backhand Adrian away. But Adrian was already gone. He slid under the attack, twisting his body and landing a second strike, an elbow to the champion's side. The impact made Zalvorin flinch. The crowd gasped. No one had ever made the champion react like that before. Adrian didn't stop. He pivoted, striking again, this time an uppercut to the ribs. Another impact. Zalvorin took a step back. A single, small step. But to the watching universe, it was earth-shattering. Adrian exhaled. His body ached from that earlier hit, but he had proven something vital. Zalvorin was not invincible. A champion's fury. The warlord's smile vanished. He looked down at Adrian, his chest rising and falling. Then, for the first time in a long, long while, he laughed. A deep, rumbling laugh that sent chills through the arena. "I see now," Zalvorin said, tightening his grip on his axe. "You're not just fast. You're a tactician." Adrian tilted his head, staying in his fighting stance. "You're catching on." The champion's muscles tensed. His aura changed. The real fight was about to begin. Zalvorin moved faster than before. His axe was a blur, slashing in rapid succession, each strike forcing Adrian to dodge by millimeters. One mistake, one misstep, and he would be dead. The human weaved through the attacks, his mind working in overdrive. He couldn't win by brute force. He had to break Zalvorin down, piece by piece. Then, the warlord changed tactics. Instead of swinging his axe, he slammed his foot into the ground. The sheer force sent a tremor through the arena, a seismic wave that shattered the stone beneath Adrian's feet. Adrian lost balance for half a second. And that was all Zalvorin needed. The champion's fist smashed into Adrian's chest. A direct hit. Adrian's breath left his lungs in an instant. His body was lifted off the ground, soaring through the air. Then he crashed, hard. His back slammed into the far side of the arena, the impact cracking the stone wall behind him. He slumped forward, gasping for air, his vision blurred from the pain. The crowd erupted. The human was down. Was this the end? The rising phoenix. Zalvorin exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "You fought well, human." The announcer's voice rose. "The champion stands victorious. The fate of Earth has been." But then, Adrian moved. Slowly, painfully. He stood up. His breaths were ragged, his body bruised, his ribs possibly broken. But his hands clenched into fists. His eyes, sharp as ever, locked onto Zalvorin. He smiled. Zalvorin stared. The crowd fell silent. "You should have stayed down," the champion muttered. Adrian wiped blood from his mouth and missed the fun. The battle was far from over. The tides turn. A battle on the edge of defeat. Pain burned through every fiber of Adrian Drake's body. His ribs ached with every breath. His vision blurred for half a second before he forced himself to focus. His body wanted to collapse, but he would not allow it. Across from him, Zalvorin stood tall and unshaken. The alien champion looked amused, but beneath that amusement, there was something else: curiosity. For the first time in decades, Zalvorin had an opponent who refused to stay down. An opponent who had blood but didn't break. The crowd watched in stunned silence. The human shouldn't have been able to rise after that last hit. He should have been crushed, motionless, another forgotten challenger in the history of the grand cosmic arena. But Adrian Drake was still standing. He spat blood onto the stone floor, wiped his mouth, and rolled his shoulders. His body was battered, but his spirit, unshaken. He locked eyes with Zalvorin. "Is that all you've got?" The warlord grinned, flexing his massive fingers around the hilt of his blue axe. "You are amusing, human." He cracked his neck, the sound echoing through the silent arena. "But amusement will not save you." Then, Zalvorin attacked. Speed versus precision. The warlord moved faster than before. Adrian barely had time to react. The blood axe cut through the air, its crimson energy pulsing like a living thing. He dodged left, the heat of the weapon brushing his arm as he narrowly avoided being split in two. Zalvorin didn't stop. A second swing. Adrian ducked. A third. He rolled forward, feeling the wind of the axe's force just inches behind him. The champion wasn't just swinging randomly anymore. He was adjusting, calculating. Each attack forced Adrian to move in a specific direction. He was being herded, backed into a corner. He needed to shift the momentum. Now. Then, the opportunity came. Zalvorin raised his axe for a downward strike, putting all his weight behind it. It was a fatal move. If it connected, Adrian would be done. But in that brief moment, Adrian saw the opening. A weakness. Zalvorin's overconfidence. Adrian didn't dodge. Instead, he rushed forward. The warlord's eyes widened for the first time. Adrian slid under the descending axe, skidding along the ground, and in that moment, he struck. A precise, brutal elbow to Zalvorin's exposed knee joint. The alien grunted as his leg buckled. But Adrian wasn't done. Before Zalvorin could recover, he twisted, driving a second strike into the same spot. This time, the warlord stumbled backward. The crowd erupted. For the first time, Zalvorin had been forced back. Exploiting the weakness, Adrian didn't stop. Pain screamed through his body, but he ignored it. He pressed the attack. A quick, brutal series of punches, striking at the champion's exposed midsection. Each hit was calculated, precise. One to the ribs, another to the same knee. A third, a powerful uppercut straight to Zalvorin's jaw. The warlord's head snapped back. The audience gasped. For the first time in his entire career, Zalvorin felt pain. He tasted blood. Adrian saw the look in his eyes, the shock, the disbelief. And he smirked. "You're not invincible," he said, breathing hard. Zalvorin stared. Then something unexpected happened. The warlord laughed. A deep, powerful laugh that echoed across the arena. Adrian narrowed his eyes. "What's so funny?" Zalvorin wiped blood from his mouth, shaking his head. "I was beginning to think I would never meet someone like you." Adrian frowned. "Like me?" The warlord's grin widened. His aura changed. "You've entertained me, human. You've impressed me." He lifted his blue axe, its energy humming ominously. "But now, I stop holding back." The temperature in the arena shifted. Something was wrong. Zalvorin's armor began to glow. His muscles bulged. The blue axe pulsed, crackling with crimson energy. And Adrian felt it, the weight of something far beyond what he had faced so far. The true power of the champion. Unleashing the beast. The crowd roared in excitement. The Galactic Council leaned forward, watching with anticipation. Adrian tightened his fists. He had forced Exalvoran to take him seriously. But now the real fight was about to begin. Alvoran vanished. Adrian barely had time to register the movement before. Crack hick. A fist slammed into his stomach, sending him flying backward. Adrian felt the impact deep in his bones. He barely had time to crash before Exalvoran was already upon him, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him off the ground. The warlord's eyes burned with excitement. "Now, human," he said, tightening his grip. "Let's see how much you can really take." Adrian gasped for air, his vision blurred. His hands grasped at Exalvoran's arm, struggling. The warlord threw him like a ragdoll. Adrian's body smashed into the ground with enough force to crack stone. Pain exploded through him. His breath caught. He tried to move. Exalvoran was already above him, bringing his axe down. Adrian rolled at the last second. The weapon smashed into the ground, sending shockwaves outward. He forced himself up, ignoring the fire in his ribs. The Exalvoran turned, his grin never fading. "Good," he said. "You're still alive." Adrian coughed, spitting blood, and smiled. "Yeah," he muttered, "and I'm not done yet." The battle was reaching its peak, and Adrian Drake wasn't ready to lose. The final gambit, the edge of defeat. Adrian Drake's body screamed in protest. Pain radiated through his ribs, his arms, his legs, everywhere. His breath was ragged, his vision blurred at the edges. Blood dripped from a deep cut on his forehead, blinding one eye. His knees threatened to buckle, but he refused to fall. Across from him, Exalvoran stood untouched. The alien warlord's aura crackled with raw power. His muscles pulsed, his blue axe glowing brighter with every passing second. This was not the same warrior Adrian had faced at the start. No, this was something else. This was a monster. The crowd had turned wild. "Kill him," shouted some. "End it, champion," roared others. Even the Galactic Council leaned forward in anticipation. The moment was coming, the final strike, the end of the battle. Adrian had lost. It was inevitable. And yet, he smiled. Exalvoran noticed. His red eyes flickered with something new. Confusion. "You still stand," the champion said, tilting his head. "You still smile. Why?" Adrian wiped the blood from his mouth. His body may have been screaming, but his mind was sharper than ever. He took a slow breath. Then he spoke. "Because you're finally fighting seriously," Adrian said. "And I've been waiting for that." Exalvoran's grin widened. "So have I." Then he attacked. The final clash. Exalvoran moved at blinding speed. His blood axe came down like a falling star, the very air around it burning with its energy. This was a killing strike. Adrian had seconds, no, fractions of a second, to react. His mind slowed time. He had studied every attack, every movement. He had seen this pattern before. But now, with Exalvoran at full power, the force behind it was unstoppable. Dodging wasn't enough. Blocking wasn't possible. But redirecting, that could work. At the last moment, Adrian shifted his stance. He stepped forward instead of backward. He met the attack head-on. The crowd gasped. Was he insane? But then, Adrian twisted his body. Instead of taking the full force of the blue axe, he angled his forearm, forcing the blade's momentum to slide past him. It was a move only someone with inhuman reflexes and absolute control could pull off. The axe slammed into the stone beside Adrian, missing his body by inches, and in that instant, he struck. A single devastating palm strike to Exalvoran's exposed throat. The warlord's eyes widened. He staggered backward. The arena fell into stunned silence. For the first time in his entire career, Exalvoran had been pushed back. The human's true power, Adrian exhaled, his heart pounding. His body was at its limit, but his mind was clear. For the past hour, he had been gathering data, analyzing the champion's weaknesses. Every species had them, even one as powerful as Salvoran, and Adrian had found it. The warlord's biggest weakness was his own strength. He relied on sheer power. He was built for dominance. He had never been forced to adjust, to adapt, to rethink. And now, Adrian was making him do exactly that. Salvoran let out a slow, rumbling growl. His red eyes burned with something new. For the first time ever, doubt. "You are not normal," he said. Adrian smirked, his breathing still heavy. "You're just figuring that out now." The warlord exhaled, rolling his shoulders. He flexed his hands. The blood axe hummed with raw energy. "Then let us finish this," Salvoran declared. Adrian nodded. Agreed. This would be the final exchange. One of them would fall. The deciding strike. The two warriors faced each other, both battered, both exhausted, both at their absolute limits. The crowd had stopped cheering. Billions of eyes watched, waiting for the final moment. Then, they moved. Salvoran charged. His blood axe glowed like a burning sun. Adrian ran forward, his body low, his hands open. The entire universe held its breath. The axe came downward. Adrian jumped. He twisted his body midair, flipping over the descending blade. His hand reached for Salvoran's exposed neck. The warlord realized too late. Adrian's fingers closed. And then, a single, perfect strike, a precise pressure point impact. A technique so refined, so controlled, so devastating, that even a warlord's body could not resist it. Silence. Then, Salvoran collapsed to his knees. His massive frame trembled. The blood axe fell from his grip. The champion's breath caught. And in front of the entire universe, Salvoran bowed his head. Defeated. The universe changes forever. The arena exploded with sound. Gasps, cries, shouts of disbelief. The galactic counselors stood in shock. The champion of the universe, the undefeated warlord, had lost. To a human, Adrian took a slow, deep breath, his entire body shaking. He had won. Earth had won. Salvoran lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's shock, he laughed. A deep, satisfied laugh. "You," he rumbled, "are the greatest opponent I have ever faced." Adrian wiped the blood from his mouth. Likewise, the warlord exhaled, then did something no one expected. He clenched his fist over his chest, the universal gesture of respect among warriors. The announcer's voice rang across the stadium. The winner, Adrian Drake. The universe had changed in that moment. A new legend was born. A human had stood against a champion. And the universe had held its breath. And then, the real war began. The moment of decision. A warrior's silence. The universe was still. The grand cosmic arena, which had moments ago been roaring with chaos, had fallen into absolute silence. Adrian Drake stood victorious. Salvoran, the undefeated warlord, knelt before him. His massive body trembled, his once mighty grip on his blood axe weak and failing. The weapon, which had carved through countless warriors, now lay useless upon the cracked stone. For the first time in history, the champion had been broken. Yet, despite his defeat, Salvoran laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound, one of amusement, of disbelief, of respect. "You, human," Salvoran murmured, lifting his gaze, "have done what I thought was impossible." Adrian wiped a streak of blood from his cheek, his breathing still labored, his body aching from the brutal battle. But he didn't collapse. He couldn't afford to. This fight wasn't just about survival. It was about what came next. The weight of a victory. The Galactic Council stood in shock, watching the scene unfold. For centuries, they had ruled with certainty. They had governed the universe under the belief that power dictated order, that the strong controlled the weak, that humans, a lesser species, would never challenge the laws of the stars. But Adrian had shattered that illusion. One man had changed the fate of an entire world. The lead counselor, a six-eyed being with shimmering golden skin, slowly stood from his floating throne. His voice, cold and calculated, rang across the stadium. By the laws of the galactic arena, the champion has fallen. He paused, his six eyes narrowing at Adrian. And yet, the fate of Earth is still undecided. The word sent ripples through the crowd. Adrian tensed. He knew this wasn't over. The council had never expected Xalvoran to lose. They weren't prepared for this outcome. And now, they were stalling. Xalvoran, still kneeling, let out a low growl. He understood the game they were playing. "This is ridiculous," the warlord said, his voice sharp, eyes glaring toward the council. He stood, towering once more, but there was no hostility in his stance, only pride. "I was defeated," he declared, his deep voice carrying across the arena. "This human has proven his worth. The laws of the grand arena demand that Earth be recognized as an equal power among the stars." The council did not respond immediately. They were calculating, thinking, searching for a way out. Adrian's hands clenched into fists. They won't honor the deal. He had won, but power-hungry rulers didn't surrender control easily. Then something unexpected happened. Xalvoran turned, not toward the council, but toward the audience. And then he bowed, a warrior's bow, a sign of ultimate respect. The crowd gasped. Across the universe, the meaning was clear. The champion had acknowledged Adrian Drake as his equal. This was a shift in the balance of power. The council could no longer ignore it. A choice that could shape the galaxy. The lead counselor's golden eyes glowed, the tension in the air tightening like a noose. He leaned forward. "Very well," he finally spoke, his voice filled with authority. "Earth shall be recognized as a rising force within the galactic order." A murmur rippled through the stadium. It was done. Or so Adrian thought. Then, the counselor's expression darkened. However, he continued, his voice taking on a more sinister tone. "This battle has drawn attention." Adrian's jaw tightened. What now? The golden-skinned counselor motioned with one hand, and a holographic projection materialized above the arena. It displayed a fleet. A massive fleet. Ships unlike any Adrian had ever seen before, black as obsidian, glowing with an eerie green energy. The crowd fell into hushed whispers. Some gasped. Others simply froze, their faces pale with fear. Xalvoran's expression shifted. His usual confident demeanor faded into something rare. Concern. Adrian noticed. His gut twisted. "What are those?" The warlord's red eyes narrowed. "They are the ones who come when balance is disturbed." Adrian's blood ran cold. The counselor smiled. "We call them the Celestial Reapers." The dark truth of the galactic arena. Adrian's mind worked rapidly. Why had the council hesitated to honor the deal? Why had Xalvoran, a warrior who feared nothing, suddenly looked uneasy? And why was a mysterious fleet approaching now, after his victory? The answer was horrifying. The battle had never just been about Earth. It had been a test, and Adrian had passed. But that meant something far worse. The moment humanity proved itself as an equal, it disrupted the balance of power in the universe. And when that happened, the Celestial Reapers arrived. Xalvoran turned to Adrian, his voice lower now, urgent. "You don't understand what you've done, human." Adrian's heartbeat pounded in his ears. "Then tell me." The warlord clenched his jaw. "The Galactic Council doesn't rule by power alone. They rule because they are allowed to. By them." Adrian frowned. "By who?" Xalvoran exhaled slowly. "The Reapers." The counselor spoke again, his voice cold. "You have won, Adrian Drake. And in doing so, you have marked your species. He gestured toward the approaching fleet. They are coming for you now. Adrian's breath caught. This wasn't victory. This was a death sentence, a warrior's decision. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some alien spectators fled from the stands, their fear evident. Others watched in stunned silence. Zalvoran turned to Adrian, his expression unreadable. You are not the first to rise, he admitted. Others have tried. They were erased. Adrian clenched his fists. His body screamed in exhaustion, but his mind was sharper than ever. The battle had been about Earth, but now it was about more than that. It was about humanity's survival. Adrian took a slow breath, staring up at the massive fleet of celestial reapers now approaching the stadium. Then he turned back to Zalvoran. Then tell me, Warlord. His eyes burned with defiance. Are you with me? A long silence. Then Zalvoran grinned, and the Warlord extended his hand. A warrior's agreement. A pact. Adrian took it. And just like that, a new war had begun. The aftermath. And new threat. The roar of a dying empire. The grand cosmic arena still trembled from the echoes of battle. Smoke and dust hung heavy in the air, mixing with the scent of sweat, blood, and something deeper, change. Adrian Drake stood in the center, battered but unbroken. His fingers curled around Zalvoran's massive hand in a firm grip. A warrior's bond had been forged. But around them, the universe was unraveling. Above, the celestial reaper's fleet loomed, a silent, terrifying presence that darkened the stars. Their ships, vast and monolithic, pulsed with eerie green energy, their hulls seeming to swallow light itself. The Galactic Council stood frozen, their golden-skinned leader clutching the armrest of his floating throne, his 6 glowing eyes shifting between Adrian and the sky above. The Council had ruled for centuries. Their power had been absolute. Until today. Until one human changed everything. The whisper of a forgotten enemy. Adrian's body was on the verge of collapse. His limbs ached, his lungs burned, and his wounds screamed with pain. But his mind was sharper than ever. He turned to Zalvoran, his grip tightening. What do you know about them? The warlord exhaled slowly, his red eyes locked on the descending fleet. I know that we are running out of time. The crowd, once roaring with excitement, had turned into a chaotic storm. Some aliens fled, vanishing into the tunnels beneath the stadium, while others watched in horrified silence. And then, the sky split open. A massive tear in space itself crackled with green lightning as the lead Reaper vessel descended, its sheer size dwarfing the entire stadium. A single beam of sickly emerald light poured downward, striking the arena floor, and from that beam, they emerged. The arrival of the Reapers. The first figure stepped through the light. It was tall, far taller than Zalvoran. Its elongated body was wrapped in black armor that seemed to shift like living shadows. Its head was smooth, featureless, except for 3 glowing green slits where eyes should be. It did not walk. It glided. Behind it, more followed. 10, 20, an entire legion of shadowed warriors, each identical, each exuding an aura of impossible power. Adrian clenched his jaw. His instincts screamed at him. This was something far worse than Zalvoran. The lead figure spoke. Its voice was not a sound. It was a feeling, a presence inside Adrian's skull, an overwhelming force that made his ears ring and his heartbeat slow. The balance has been disturbed. The words were not a threat. They were a declaration. The figure turned its head slightly, as if studying Adrian. A species unfit to rise has risen. Adrian took a step forward, ignoring the pain in his body. His voice was rough, but steady. I don't take kindly to people deciding what I am. A long silence followed. Then, the Reaper moved, faster than Adrian could react. 1 second, the being was 20 feet away. The next, it was in front of him. The death strike. A single blackened hand lashed out, fingers extended like claws, aiming for Adrian's heart. Everything slowed. Adrian tried to move, but his body wasn't fast enough. The Vorin was. The warlord's massive hand shot forward, catching the Reaper's wrist before impact. The entire arena shook as their forces clashed. Vorin grimaced, muscles bulging. "You will not touch him." The Reaper tilted its head, curious. The champion kneels before a human. Has the galaxy fallen so far? Vorin's grip tightened. No. His red eyes burned like fire. It has risen. Then he threw the Reaper backward. The crowd gasped. No one had ever laid a hand on a celestial Reaper and lived. The alien warrior rolled mid-air, landing smoothly, unbothered. But now it knew. Adrian was not alone. Vorin stood beside him, and far above, something else was happening. A universe awakens. Across the galaxy, the battle had been broadcasted. Millions of species, warriors, rebels, mercenaries, kings, had watched a human fight and defeat the galactic champion. Now they watched the celestial Reapers descend. And in the darkest corners of space, in the hidden colonies where the oppressed whispered of revolution, in the war-torn planets ruled by the Council's iron fist, something stirred. A spark ignited. The first rebellion in 1,000 years had just begun. The warrior's choice. Back in the arena, Adrian felt it. The shift. The moment where history changed. He glanced at Vorin, then at the Reapers. He could run. He could escape and return to Earth. Or he could fight. Not just for himself. Not just for Earth. For everyone. Adrian exhaled, rolling his shoulders. His entire body ached, but he was not broken. He raised his fists. Vorin grinned. "You are insane, human." Adrian smirked. "You just figuring that out." The Reaper lifted its hand. The fleet above began to hum, green lights charging. Adrian narrowed his eyes. Then he said the words that would define the future. "Come and get me." The final war had begun.